I want to start this story with a truth I learned far too late in life. Silence can be kind. Silence can be peaceful. But sometimes, silence can be the heaviest sound you ever carry inside your heart. I learned that the day my daughter-in-law told me to leave. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult me. She did not even look angry. She simply said, in a very soft, steady voice, "Mama, I think it's time you stayed somewhere else for a while." And I smiled. I did not cry, though I felt the sting behind my eyes. I did not ask why. I did not argue or beg her to reconsider. I smiled because sometimes a smile is the only thing a mother has left to protect the dignity of the family she spent her whole life trying to keep together. I stood there, in my son's living room, holding the warm cup of tea she had just made me. Steam rose from it. The house was quiet. My grandson's toys were scattered on the floor. The curtains were half drawn, as if the room itself was unsure whether to stay open or hide away. Her silence, after her words, it was louder than any explanation she could have given. It filled the room like a slow, spreading fog. And in that silence, I understood something she never actually said. I had overstayed my welcome. My son was not home. He had left for work earlier that morning, giving me a goodbye kiss on the forehead like he always used to. He didn't know this conversation would happen while he was gone. Maybe she waited on purpose for him to leave. Or maybe she didn't want him to see her hurt me. But I do not want to paint her as a villain. I will not tell this story with anger or bitterness. She is not a bad woman. She is young, learning, stressed, managing a house, a child, a job, and a marriage that I know is not always easy. I understand that now. Back then, though, when she asked me to leave, all I could think was, when did I become a burden? I remember nodding. My hands were steady on the teacup, but inside, something was trembling. Not rage, not disappointment, just a soft, tired sadness, like when you watch rain fall on a day you had hoped would stay sunny. "I understand," I said. Even though she hadn't offered a reason, she only looked at me with tired eyes. She looked like someone who had held something inside for too long. For a moment, I wanted to reach out and hold her hand. I wanted to tell her I wasn't angry. I wanted to tell her I understood the pressure, the exhaustion, the silent expectations placed on a daughter-in-law. I had been one once too. I knew the weight of it. But I didn't reach out. I didn't say any comforting words, because something inside me whispered, let her speak her truth, even if it hurts you. But she did not speak. She only looked at me, then looked down at her hands. When I finally set the teacup aside and said, "I'll start packing," her shoulders dropped with relief. That relief hurt more than her words. Not because she was cruel, but because relief meant she had been wanting to say it for a long time. I walked slowly to the small guest room where I had been staying. The door was half open, and I could see the bed neatly made from the night before. I always kept it tidy. I never wanted to create extra work. I folded my blanket gently, smoothing the corners like I used to smooth my son's school uniform when he was little. I touched the blanket and remembered all the mornings I would wake early to make tea for the family, the sound of my grandson's giggles running down the hallway, the warmth of belonging. And now that warmth was quietly slipping away. As I opened my small suitcase, I realized how little I actually owned. A few clothes, my old diary, a framed photo of my husband who had passed 9 years ago, and a small wooden spoon my grandson had painted for me in preschool with messy blue strokes. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that spoon for a long time. My fingers traced the uneven paint, the dried lines of childish creativity. It felt like holding a piece of love that didn't know how to hurt me. My daughter-in-law walked past the door once. She paused for a second, as if wanting to say something. I waited, but she kept walking. Her silence followed her like a thin shadow. I packed slowly, carefully, making sure not to leave anything behind that might inconvenience her later. When I closed the suitcase, the click of the latch echoed through the quiet house. It sounded final, like the end of a chapter. I carried the bag to the living room. She was sitting there, hands clasped, staring at the floor. "I'll call a taxi," I said softly. She lifted her head, looked at me with eyes that were shiny, maybe from guilt, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from love she didn't know how to show. "You don't have to," she whispered. "My cousin can drop you." "It's all right," I told her. "I want to go quietly." Quietly. That word wrapped around me like a thin blanket that protects nothing but hides everything. She nodded. Another silence settled between us. I looked around the living room, the plants I used to water, the kitchen I used to cook in, the toys I used to gather every evening, the little footprints on the tiles, signs of life I had been part of. Now I was stepping out of that picture. As I walked toward the door, she stood up. She opened her mouth slightly, just a little, but no words came out. Instead, she placed her hand on the back of the sofa, gripping it tightly. A nervous gesture. A gesture of someone who has something to say, but doesn't know how. I waited, but she stayed silent. So I smiled again. A small, soft smile. Not out of happiness, but out of love. Love that didn't want to leave scars. "I'll come visit," I said quietly. She nodded again. And then I left. The door closed behind me with a gentle click, but to me, it sounded like thunder. Outside, the sky was cloudy. It looked like it wanted to rain but wasn't ready yet, just like me. That was the day her silence became the loudest sound in my life. I still remember one quiet evening, maybe a week after I arrived. The house was warm, but the silence felt a little too heavy. Aisha was cutting vegetables in the kitchen. Her movements were quick, practiced, almost rhythmic. I stood nearby, folding a few dry dishes because I wanted to help. She did not look up when she spoke. "Ami, you do not need to do all this. Just rest." Her words were gentle, but her tone was not close. It was careful, like someone speaking from a distance even when standing close. I smiled again. "It is all right," I said softly. "My hands feel empty when they are not working." She nodded, still without looking at me. I knew this feeling, the feeling of being wanted but not needed, welcomed but not embraced. It was no one's fault. Life changes. People grow. Homes shape themselves around new habits, new routines, new hearts. But even knowing all this, a quiet ache sat inside me, like a small stone I carried in my chest. That night, when I lay in the guest room, I listened to the house breathing around me, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of the ceiling fan, the occasional muffled footsteps in the hallway. A home has its own heartbeat, and I was still learning this one. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Give it time. They are good children. Everything needs time." Days turned into weeks, and I saw small moments that warmed my heart. Sometimes Hassan would bring me tea without me asking. Sometimes Aisha would ask if I wanted anything from the market. Sometimes I heard them speaking softly at night about expenses, about schedules, about the future, and I felt proud of how grown and responsible they had become. But in between those moments, there were also the quiet spaces, the ones that made me feel like I lived in the house, but not in the lives of the people inside it. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found Aisha sitting with her mother on a video call. They were laughing together, a soft, natural laughter full of ease and history. I stopped in the doorway. Not wanting to interrupt, I turned to leave. But Aisha looked up at the same moment. "Oh, Ummi," she said. Her smile faded just a little, like she wasn't sure what expression to wear. "Do you need something?" I shook my head. "No, beta. I was just passing by." Her mother on the screen smiled politely at me. Aisha introduced us briefly, and I greeted her with respect. The call ended a few minutes later, and then Aisha quietly began clearing the table. I don't know why that small moment stayed with me. Maybe because it reminded me of my own mother, how she would talk to me with that same ease, that same light in her eyes. The kind of ease that only comes from years of being seen, truly seen. I missed that too. But life is like that. People love you, but their love changes shape. Sometimes it grows wider, sometimes it grows quieter. One morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. The sky outside was pale blue, gently stretching awake. I made a cup of tea and sat near the window, feeling the cool air kiss my hands. As I sat there, I realized something important. I had lived so many years building a home, caring for people, filling silence with conversation, that I never really learned how to sit with myself. Every sound in this new house felt like a reminder that I was a visitor here, not unwanted, just temporary. And maybe that was the way life was supposed to be. But accepting that took strength, a quiet kind of strength I did not know I had. Later that week, something happened, something small but meaningful. Aisha came home looking tired. Her shoulders were heavy, her eyes dim. I asked softly, "Beta, everything all right?" She paused. For the first time, she let me see her tiredness. "Yes," she said, "just a long day." I gestured toward the sofa. "Come, sit for a while." She hesitated, then sat beside me.
Not across the room, not at the far end, right beside me. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt her trust open just a little, like a window being cracked open for fresh air. We sat there, drinking tea, not saying much, just sharing the same silence. But this time, the silence felt softer. And in that small moment, I felt a warmth spreading inside me. Because sometimes connection does not come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in shared quietness. Still, despite these small moments, something inside me kept whispering that a bigger storm was waiting ahead. A shift, a change, something I could not name yet. And when it finally arrived, it came not as a shout, but as a whisper that changed everything. The change began quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Small things, small moments, small hesitations that you only understand later when you look back. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing tea. The house was calm, the sun was soft outside, and a gentle breeze moved the curtains like a slow breath. Aisha walked in, her face thoughtful, almost tense. She opened the cabinet, looked at the cups, closed it again, and then sighed quietly. I thought she was tired from work, so I smiled and said, "Let me make dinner tonight, you rest." She gave a faint smile. "Thank you, Ammi, but it's okay, I will manage." But she didn't sound okay. There was something weighing on her heart, and it wasn't just a long day. Over the next few days, I noticed her mood shifting in small ways. When I asked if she needed help, she would say, "No, it's fine, Ammi." But her voice carried a thin layer of pressure. When I folded the laundry, she murmured softly, "You don't need to do this." But her eyes darted to the clothes like something was out of place. Once, I swept the living room and she gently took the broom from my hand. "Please, Ammi, I will do it." I stepped back, a little confused. I only wanted to ease her burden, but somehow my help had become a burden, at least to her. I understood slowly, painfully, that she had her own rhythms, her own system, her own way, and maybe she felt watched or judged or overshadowed, even if that was never my intention. Mothers don't always realize when their presence, though filled with love, becomes a quiet pressure in someone else's home. One afternoon, something small happened, tiny, almost silly, but it stayed in my heart like a thorn. I moved a set of dishes from one shelf to another because I thought it looked more organized. Later that day, Aisha stood there, staring at the empty space where the dishes used to be. She took a slow breath, a tired one.
Then she turned to me and asked very softly, Ummi, did you move these? Her voice wasn't angry, just strained, like a thread pulled too tight. I nodded. Yes, Beta, I thought. She closed her eyes for a moment. Only a moment, but it was enough for me to understand. She didn't like it. I stepped back immediately. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it. She opened her eyes, then gave a small smile, polite but absent. It's okay. I just like things a certain way. I nodded, keeping my own smile steady. Of course. But inside, something wilted. Not because she corrected me, but because I realized I had done something that made her feel unsettled in her own home. And no woman likes that feeling. No woman wants her space to feel unfamiliar, not even to please someone else. In the nights that followed, sleep came slower. I would lie awake in the guest room, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. The shadows on the walls would shift gently, like memories passing by. I kept thinking, am I too much here? Am I taking up space they need for themselves? Am I helping or disturbing their balance? These questions traveled through my thoughts like slow-moving clouds. I did not want to burden anyone, least of all my own children. But there was a loneliness creeping into my chest, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't cry, doesn't hurt loudly. It just sits there, heavy and silent. Then came a small but unmistakable sign, a moment that told me the distance between us had grown more than I realized. Hassan had returned home late one evening. He walked in tired, put his bag down, and sat on the sofa. I brought him a glass of water. He took it with a tired smile and asked, How was your day, Ummi? I told him it was good, quiet, peaceful. Aisha came into the room then, and they exchanged a subtle look, a look that lasted only a second, but I saw it. Two people having a private conversation without speaking, a shared thought, a shared concern. I wasn't part of it. They weren't excluding me, but the closeness between them felt like a closed door, and I stood gently outside. Hassan said, Ami, we need to talk later. His tone was soft, kind, but unexpected. A small tremor went through my chest. Not fear, just uncertainty. Because when a child says, we need to talk, it rarely brings comfort to a mother's heart. The next morning, he didn't bring it up, but I felt the weight of those words all day. Something was coming, something he didn't know how to say, something they had discussed quietly before I walked into the room, and I had no idea whether it was small or something that would shape the rest of my stay. The house felt different that day, a little too quiet, a little too careful. Aisha moved around the kitchen softly, avoiding any sound. Hassan kept glancing toward me, then away, like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage yet. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The first gentle crack in the ground beneath my feet. A shift, a warning, a beginning of something I could not yet see. But it was coming, and when it arrived, it did not come slowly. It came all at once, in a single conversation that changed everything. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that should have been peaceful. Soft sunlight on the curtains, the gentle sound of children playing in the street, the distant call of a vendor passing by. A day that looked calm on the outside, while something inside the house prepared to break. I was in the living room, folding a small stack of freshly washed towels. I liked doing little things like that. It made me feel useful, connected. I could hear Aisha in the kitchen moving around quietly. Hassan was pacing somewhere in the hallway, his steps uneven. There was something in the air, a tension, a heaviness, like a storm gathering behind a closed door. After a while, Hassan came into the living room. "Ami," he said gently, "can we talk?" Those 3 words again, this time with purpose. I set the towels down, smoothed the corners, took a breath that felt heavier than it should have. "Yes, Betha," I said. He sat down beside me, but not too close. Aisha came in as well, drying her hands on a towel, and took a seat on the other sofa, not beside him, not beside me. Between us was space, too much space. Hassan looked at Aisha for a second, then back at me. "Ami, we wanted to discuss something with you." His voice was soft, careful, like he was speaking to something fragile. I leaned forward slightly. "I'm listening." He hesitated. His eyes moved to his hands, then back to my face. Aisha looked down completely, at the floor, not at me. The silence felt long, too long. Finally, Hassan exhaled and said it. "Ami, we think maybe it would be better if you return to your own home for a while." The words landed gently, but inside me, they shook something deep. I blinked once, twice. My hands became still in my lap. "For a while," I repeated quietly. He nodded. "Yes, not permanently, just a little time." I swallowed, feeling something warm rise slowly in my chest, something that wasn't anger, just ache. I turned my head toward Aisha. She didn't look up. She just kept staring at the floor, fingers tightening slightly around the towel she held. It hurt more than the words, because silence from a daughter-in-law is louder than any sentence. I tried to smile, not wanting the moment to break anyone's heart further. But the smile didn't reach my eyes. I asked softly, "Did I do something wrong?" Hassan shook his head quickly. "No, Ami, it's not like that. It's just the house is small and we need some space to adjust." And Aisha finally lifted her eyes. Only for a second. A glance. A guilty glance. Then she looked away again. That 1 second told me more than any conversation could. This wasn't about space, or adjustment, or the size of the house. This was about comfort, her comfort, and my presence had become too heavy for her heart. Even if she never meant to hurt me, even if she tried to hide it behind politeness and quietness, a mother knows, a woman knows, a guest knows when a home no longer feels open. I kept my voice gentle. I didn't want to cry. Not in front of them. Not in front of my son. "What changed?" I asked softly. "What made you both feel this way?" Hassan looked helpless. "It's nothing big, Ami. Please don't think too much. We just thought it would be better for everyone." For everyone. Sometimes the simplest sentence can hold the deepest ache. I nodded slowly, my fingers curling slightly on my lap. I didn't want them to see the trembling there. I looked at Aisha again. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ami, I respect you a lot, truly, but I feel like I can't manage things properly when you're here. I get nervous. I feel afraid of disappointing you." She paused, voice shaking. And I think that pressure is affecting all of us. Her eyes filled with moisture. Not tears, moisture from trying to hold them back. And that's when the realization hit me. Gentle but deep. She wasn't pushing me away out of dislike. She was drowning quietly, trying to breathe. And my presence, though filled with love, had become a weight she couldn't carry. Sometimes you hurt people, even when you only wanted to help them. And sometimes they hurt you back without meaning to. That is life. That is family. That is the quiet tragedy of living together. I took a slow breath. My voice came out softer than I expected. I understand. Hassan frowned. Ami, you don't have to agree so quickly. We can talk. I shook my head gently. There is no need. You both are young. This is your home, your space, your life together. I don't want to stand in the way of that. Aisha looked up suddenly, eyes widening with guilt. No, Ami, please don't think. I raised my hand slightly, not to silence her, but to ease her worry. It's all right, Beta, I said. I never wanted to be a burden. If leaving gives you both peace, then I will pack my things. My voice didn't break, but something inside me did, quietly, soundlessly, the way old things break, without anyone noticing. After that, the room fell silent. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the air. Hassan's eyes became moist, but he didn't know what to say. Aisha looked frozen, torn between relief and sadness. And I sat there calmly, the way mothers do, hiding their storm behind a steady face. Because parents don't show their pain, they protect their children from it, even when that pain comes from the same children they are protecting. I stood up slowly. I will start packing after tea, I said softly. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them stopped me. And in that quiet, something inside the home shifted forever. Something warm loosened its grip. Something familiar faded just a little. That was the moment I understood. I was no longer needed here. Not the way I had been before. Not the way a mother dreams she will always be. And sometimes silence says everything. I made tea because that's what my hands knew how to do when my heart felt unsteady. The kitchen felt different that day. The familiar rhythm of opening cupboards, the soft clink of cups, they all felt heavier, slower. Aisha stood nearby, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, unsure if she should help or step back. I didn't look at her directly, but I could feel her guilt filling the space between us. She reached out once, quietly. Ami, let me do it, she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. I smiled gently, shaking my head. It's all right, Beta. Let me do it. One last time. She froze at those words, not because they were sharp, but because they were honest. I made 3 cups of tea, just like always. 1 for Hassan, 1 for her, 1 for myself. When I placed the cup in front of her, her fingers trembled. She whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. And I believed her, truly. But sometimes life hurts even without blame. After tea, I went to the small room they had given me. The afternoon sunlight was slanting through the curtains, catching dust in the air. Beautiful, floating dust that made the room look like a memory. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, just sat there, breathing. Then I reached for the old suitcase under the bed. It had been years since I touched it. I had almost forgotten it was still there. Funny how life brings back old things when new things fade. I opened the suitcase slowly. It smelled faintly of wood and old perfume. I folded my clothes carefully, one by one. My hands stayed steady, even though my heart felt anything but. As I packed, I found small reminders of my time in this house. A recipe card Aisha wrote for me, a small paper drawing Hassan had made when he was younger, a button from a shirt I had stitched for him years ago. Little pieces of love scattered through time. I placed them gently inside the suitcase, not because I needed them, but because they had become part of me. While I worked, the house remained quiet. Hassan passed by my door once. He paused, like he wanted to say something, but then he walked away without speaking. Perhaps words felt too heavy for him, too. Perhaps he didn't know how to hold his guilt properly. Sons often don't. Aisha peeked in later. Her eyes were hesitant, full of worry. "Ami, please let me help," she said softly. I looked up at her and smiled. "You helping me means you're hurting yourself, Beta. I can't let you do that." She bit her lip, looked down, and whispered, "I don't want you to leave thinking I don't care." I stood and placed my hand gently on her arm. "I know you care," I said. "I see it in small things, in tea waiting on the table, in the way you fold Hassan's shirts. You care, just differently." Her eyes filled again. I felt a sudden urge to hug her, to comfort her the way a mother would comfort a child. So I did, gently, with quiet warmth. She stiffened for a second, then melted into the hug, holding on to me tightly. "Ami, I really didn't want this," she whispered into my shoulder. "I know," I said. And that was the truth. It's possible to love someone and still feel suffocated. It's possible to respect someone and still feel overwhelmed. It's possible for two good hearts to still not fit perfectly under one roof. By evening, I was packed. The sun outside had turned golden, stretching long shadows across the floor. Hassan finally came into the room, eyes shining with unspoken regret. "Ami, you don't have to go," he said quietly, standing in the doorway. I looked at him. My son, my little boy, the one whose bruised knees I had bandaged, the one whose school lunches I had packed, the one whose dreams I had carried even when he didn't see them yet. "You think this is easy for me?" I asked softly. He looked down. I stepped closer and placed my hand on his cheek. "You have a life now," I said. "You have responsibilities, a marriage, a home to build. I don't want you to choose between your mother and your wife. That is a cruel choice for any man." He shook his head, voice cracking. "Ami, I feel like I failed you." I smiled sadly. "No, Beta, you just grew up. That's all children are meant to do." His tears finally fell, and I wiped them gently with my thumb, the same way I had when he was small. When I stepped out of the house with my suitcase, the air felt cool. Aisha stood behind Hassan, holding his arm, eyes red and swollen. I turned to them and said softly, "This is not goodbye. This is just giving space for love to breathe again." Aisha covered her mouth with her hand. She was crying silently, the way gentle people cry. Hassan reached for my hands. "Come back whenever you want, Ami," he whispered. I nodded. "I will, when hearts feel lighter." We shared a long, quiet moment. No anger, no blame, just sadness wrapped in love. Then I walked slowly toward the gate. The sound of my footsteps felt strangely loud. When I reached the gate, I turned back for one last look. Hassan's arm was around Aisha. She leaned into him. They held each other like two people afraid of breaking, and I realized something important. Sometimes stepping away is not losing. Sometimes it is protecting what is left. Sometimes love survives because someone chooses to walk out gently, not slam the door. As I walked down the street, a breeze passed by, carrying the faint scent of someone's dinner cooking. Children were laughing somewhere. The world was still moving. Life was still happening. But inside me, something quiet has shifted. Not broken, just changed. A chapter closing without anger, a chapter opening without certainty. And in that moment, I understood. Letting go was not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of loving differently. The first night back in my own home was quieter than I expected. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The ceiling fan creaked the way it always did. The air smelled faintly of dust and old memories. Nothing had changed in the house, but everything had changed inside me. I placed my suitcase beside the bed and sat down slowly. The mattress dipped under my weight, familiar and yet strangely distant. I touched the bedsheet, tracing the lines of its faded pattern, the same pattern I had spread out years ago. Back then, I remember thinking, one day this house will be full again. Now it welcomed me like an old friend, waiting patiently in silence. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would. But instead, I felt a strange calmness settling over me, like a soft blanket placed on tired shoulders. Sometimes peace arrives not as joy, but as acceptance. The next morning, sunlight came through the window in soft beams. I sat with a cup of tea on the veranda, listening to birds somewhere on the electric wires. Without anyone rushing around, without footsteps in the hallway, without voices calling from room to room, it felt empty but not painful, just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something I had not admitted to myself before. I had been tired too. Tired of walking on gentle eggshells around Aisha, tired of wondering if my presence was too much, tired of trying to fit into a space that had its own rhythm. Maybe Hassan and Aisha weren't the only ones who needed room to breathe. Maybe I needed it too. The thought surprised me at first, but it settled softly, like truth often does. Days passed slowly. I cleaned the house a little each morning, cooked small meals, watered the plants, folded laundry with no rush, no noise, no shadows of tension. Sometimes I sat by the window watching life outside, neighbors talking, children playing, people carrying groceries. I wasn't lonely, just alone. There's a difference, you know. Loneliness is hunger. Being alone is choosing to breathe your own air. I had spent so many years giving myself to others, as a wife, a mother, a caretaker, that I had forgotten the shape of my own life when it belonged only to me. And now, like someone rediscovering an old photograph, I began to see myself again. One afternoon, while I was watering the jasmine plants outside, Hassan called. His voice was softer than usual, warm, careful. "Ummi, how are you?" I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "I'm all right, Beta, just resting." There was a pause on the line. Then he said quietly, "The house feels empty without you." I smiled gently. Empty is not always bad. He exhaled deeply, as if releasing days of guilt. "Aisha made kheer today," he said. "She said it didn't taste like yours." I laughed softly, a small, warm laugh that surprised even me. No one's food tastes the same, Beta. Each hand has its own story. He was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "Will you come visit?" I thought of Aisha, her guilt, her confusion, her fragile heart trying to carry a home. I thought of Hassan, caught between love and responsibility, trying his best in a world that gives no manual. And I thought of myself, trying to hold everyone together, forgetting to hold myself too. Finally, I said, "Yes, I will visit. Not today, but soon." He didn't argue. He knew I meant it. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, letting the moment settle. Healing doesn't happen in dramatic scenes. It happens in small breaths, in simple sentences, in silent understandings. Weeks passed and life found a gentle rhythm. I began going for short walks in the evening. Sometimes I bought fresh vegetables from the corner stall. Sometimes I chatted with an old neighbor who always had stories to tell. Sometimes I simply enjoyed the breeze on my face. It wasn't the life I imagined, but it was a life growing tenderly around me. One day, Aisha sent me a message, a single line. "Ummi, can I come visit you?" My heart softened. "Of course," I replied. She came that weekend. When I opened the door, she hesitated like a child, entering a room she feared. But then she stepped forward and hugged me, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of something real. "Ummi, I'm sorry," she whispered, and for the first time, her silence was replaced with honesty. I held her gently. "It's all right, Betha," I said. "A home is not built in a day. Love is not perfect. People are not perfect. We just learn where to stand so we don't step on each other." She cried softly in my arms, not for what happened, but for what she had carried inside. And I felt something inside me ease, as though the universe had finally sighed with relief. We had tea together. She told me about the house, about Hassan, about the small things she had been learning, about moments when she missed my guidance, about moments she felt free. I listened without judging, without holding on, without expecting anything. And in that quiet conversation, I realized something important. Distance does not ruin love. Ego does. Silence does. Unspoken fear does. Space, however, space can save it. Space can make room for two hearts to grow instead of collide. Months later, when I visited their home again, it felt different. Aisha opened the door with a genuine smile. Hassan hugged me tightly. The house felt peaceful. No tension in the walls, no heaviness in the air. I stayed for dinner, laughed, listened, helped Aisha with the dishes, talked with Hassan about his work, and when it was time to leave, Aisha held my hand. "Ami, come often," she said quietly. And this time, I knew she meant it, not as an obligation, not as duty, but from the heart. As I walked home that night, the street lights cast long shadows on the pavement. The cool breeze touched my cheeks. A quiet contentment settled inside me, warm and steady. I understood something deeply at that moment. Love doesn't always stay the way we want it to. Sometimes it shifts. Sometimes it stretches. Sometimes it asks us to step back so it can grow without breaking. Letting go is not losing. Letting go is trusting love enough to give it room. And when you release something gently, it has a way of coming back to you in a healthier, softer form. So here is what life taught me. Sometimes people hurt you without intending to. Sometimes you must walk away without anger. Sometimes distance is the medicine a relationship never knew it needed. And sometimes silence is where healing begins. But love, real love, never leaves. It just changes shape, and you learn to hold it differently, with open hands, with peaceful heart, with quiet strength. And that, I think, is the kind of ending life gives when it wants you to grow.